Assessment 101, Creating Instructional Opportunities for Continuous Learning. The focus of this learning is to explore our collective understanding of the word assessment. We will be looking at assessment vocabulary and the continuous journey of assessment that accompanies standards-based learning. As you progress through this learning, please consider how these ideas connect with your current teaching and practices. When you see this icon on the screen, please pause the video for reflection and discussion. Assessment is first and foremost a teaching tool, not just a way to report scores or grades. While the results of assessment may be used to create a report of student achievement, consider that assessment is actually part of our instructional practices and not a separate event. Take a moment now to reflect and discuss the role assessment currently plays in your instructional framework and instructional practices. Assessment is a key ingredient in developing a guaranteed and viable curriculum. The assessment work in our curricular program supports HRS Level 3 indicators. Specifically, Indicator 3.1 requires curriculum and assessment to adhere to standards. And Indicator 3.5 requires that we use assessment data to regularly monitor student achievement goals. Our goal is to support flexible assessment practices while at the same time providing valid and reliable assessment resources for all teachers. Teachers, PLCs, and guiding coalitions use proficiency scales to develop formative assessment plans that support student growth at the building level. Guiding coalitions and curricular work teams determine which Score 3.0 assessment items become our district assessment bank. Proficiency scales inform all parts of the instructional cycle. Teachers use proficiency scales as a guide to generate assessment items for each level of the learning progression. This helps the PLC to gather the information they need to answer learning-focused questions that will generate growth for all learners. Now, please take a moment to reflect on how your PLC uses proficiency scales to inform instruction and feedback. Let's make sure we have a guaranteed and viable assessment vocabulary. On the next few slides, we will review vocabulary items that are often used to describe assessment practices. We commonly refer to assessment as a noun or thing we give to students, but assessment is something much bigger. The act of assessing is a responsive process or verb of reflecting on whether or not a target has been achieved. Assessing can actually be done by either a teacher or a learner and is most effective when done together. Please take a moment to reflect on when and why your assessment practices might be one or the other. Assessments are often categorized as formative or summative. Take a moment to decide which of these statements are referring to formative assessment practices and which are referring to summative assessment practices. To summarize this thinking and learning, formative assessment is an ongoing instructional practice with the primary purpose of modifying instruction to promote student achievement of learning outcomes. Summative assessments often happen at the end of a grading period or unit to confirm which knowledge and skills students have mastered. Common assessments are developed by two or more educators with the purpose of collaboratively examining the results and differentiating instruction. PLC teams use common assessment practices to grow their collective efficacy around the impact of learning on student achievement. Common assessments may be as simple as teachers agreeing to collectively use a single targeted assessment item, but remember, it's not common unless teachers collaboratively examine the results. Take a moment now to reflect on how your PLC has engaged with common assessment practices. Assessments are sometimes referred to as obtrusive or unobtrusive. Take a moment to decide which of these statements are referring to obtrusive assessment practices and which are referring to unobtrusive assessment practices. To summarize, obtrusive assessments are formal in nature and they feel like tests, where unobtrusive assessments happen authentically and often focus on a specific learning target. The biggest difference is that obtrusive assessment practices interrupt or stop learning and instruction, while unobtrusive practices allow the learner to continue. Unobtrusive assessment practices are highly effective instructional tools due to their ability to be specific, personalized, and authentic. When we think about authentic and personalized assessment, our goal is to give students ownership and choice in how they demonstrate learning. These are often called student-generated assessments. Take a moment to discuss what opportunities you have experienced in providing personalized and authentic assessments for learners. Because learning is a dynamic process, it is difficult to define assessment under a single descriptor. Now, take a few moments to identify a piece of learner evidence that you have collected for assessment. Describe the instructional practices that you would use to make your assessment formative or summative, obtrusive or unobtrusive, and/or personalized and authentic or common. Assessment is anything a teacher does to gain information about what a student knows and is able to do. Through your reflection and discussion during this learning, this becomes your definition of assessment. Assessment is more than just testing a student at the end of a unit. Assessment is a continual process or journey of refining instruction and learning for students and teachers throughout the year. Now let's explore assessment as part of a learning journey. On the next slide, we will introduce a graphic that illustrates instruction and assessment as a journey of continuous learning. This graphic represents the combination of proficiency skills, the instructional cycle, the PLC process, and assessment practices. If we think about assessment for learning as a continuous process, we can use these learning-focused questions to align our assessment practices to the learning journey. Now, take a few minutes to read and discuss each stage in the learning journey provided with your group. Reflect on where you see connections with your instructional framework. Assessing is not a one-and-done process, but rather a reflective, ongoing process that looks different for each learner and practitioner. As Carol Ann Tomlinson, renowned educator and author of The Differentiated Classroom, wisely stated, "Assessment is the means we use to modify tomorrow's instruction." Thanks for listening and learning. Please send any questions to LDI@learningdesign@bismarckschools.org.